Jennifer Valentine-Miller Show hosts MVs from various artists. If you'd like to know the details of a musical item played today, please visit Jennifer Valentine-Miller at PRZ-FM 109.2.
Black History Month. Let's start from the beginning and find out who created it. Well, a black man born in the US in 1875 named Carter G. Woodson studied history throughout his life, and he worked hard to promote black history in schools. He then created Black History Week, which then turned into a whole month. It was originally founded to recognize the contributions of people from African and Caribbean backgrounds. In the United States, it's in February, but in the UK, it's in October. And you may be thinking, why isn't there a History Month for other races and ethnicities? Well, there is an East and Southeast Asian Heritage Month, but they're perhaps not as widely known as Black History Month. And when it comes to other races, while they don't all have an official History Month that's been formally recognized, they do celebrate their history in lots of other ways. So, why is Black History Month important? Let me explain. Black people have lived in the UK for hundreds of years and play a key part in British history. However, some people believe that their stories have not always been told and can often be overlooked. Many campaigners want schools to include more Black history in lessons, so Black History Month is a time to celebrate those people and their stories. So, now we know who created it and why, but how do people celebrate it? There's a few, so I need a deep breath. School fairs, learning about Black history, awards, TV shows, reading books by Black authors, cooking events, supporting Black businesses, attending Black history events, donating to charities, and many, many more. Now you're all set, but don't mind me. I just need to go and catch my breath.
Hi, this is Jennifer from Human Relations PR. Octo is Latin for 8, which has no significance because we're in the 10th month. However, Halloween has significance. It began as early as AD 270 in the Celt culture in Ireland. The feast was not just a memorial to their deceased relatives, it was also a thanksgiving to close the summer season of light and to prepare diligently for entering the darkness of the long winter season. It was the Christian monks at that time who decided All Hallowed Day would be an effective way to share the gospel and proclaim that Christ, their creator and saviour, defeated Satan, death, and the evil one at the cross. They believed that through him alone, demons and evil powers will flee. Is this the same thought today?
Hi. Welcome to the Jennifer Valentine-Miller Show. The subject during this economic crisis is about Jesus being our rest. Rest is the assurance of his promise. Exodus 35:2 says, "In 6 days the work shall be done, and on the 7th day we shall rest." Not a mere rest, it is a holy rest. It is holy because God designated the 7th as such. Then it is given to the Lord by living it in his word, and dedicating your time to him. The Sabbath was only about resting, which Christians can do now in Jesus. Matthew 11:28 reads, "Come unto me, all ye who are heavy laden, and I will go you rest." In addition, we ask ourselves, how do we get rest in Jesus and how we come onto him? Jesus directs if we were to enter into a life of rest, then get rest, we are to keep his commandments. John 10:27 says, "My sheep hear my voice, and I know them and they follow me." The law should provide us with rest and assurance. The way of Jesus was to his Father in heaven, and he did so by doing the will of the Father, using the laws and commandments as his guide. Jesus confirmed that he did not come to destroy or change the law. In fact, he came to destroy. Jesus was the living law. Rejecting the law is rejecting Jesus and vice versa, which brings wrath in John 3:6. Therefore, how can any Christian professing to follow Christ think they are no longer under the law, especially under Jesus' directive? During our time of rest, the statutes of the Lord are right. Rejoicing the commandment of the Lord is pure, and it enlightens the eyes in Psalms 19:11. So if one rests in Jesus, keep all his and his Father's commandments. Whether you get to heaven in obedience to the law or faith in Jesus, following for what he stands, do as he did. There is a positive side to this bonding concept. When the Jews in Exodus marked the doorposts, they were bound under God's promise and protection. Similarly, a person is protected by the legal system under which they are bound. Thus, being bound by the law has its positive benefits of protection. Jesus is aware that anyone who says "I keep all the commandments" is a liar, and the truth is not in him. The truth should not be concealed or compromised for fear of offending. When aiming to receive total rest, seek the advice of others, including the Word of God, because according to Psalm 27:17, iron sharpens iron.
13th century priories. Behind every backdrop of a village lies a church. A hamlet can only be called a village until it has a community. Churches or religious buildings brings a community together, and they have served that purpose for a long time. A small number of English and Welsh religious houses can trace their origins back to pre-conquest and Anglo-Saxon Celtic foundations. This was unfortunately during a time when churches were suppressed. The overwhelming majority of the 625 monastic communities dissolved by Henry VIII owed their existence to the wave of monastic enthusiasm that had swept Western Christendom in the 11th and 12th centuries. Very few English houses had been founded later than the end of the 13th century. In 1153, for example, the Archbishop of Canterbury, Wood, gave certain houses to Benedictine nuns and charged them an annual rent rate of 2 marks. Many a times there were demands for lamb, wool, and various sheaves. In the early 1500s, it was inevitable that these smaller houses or priories would eventually succumb to poverty. The larger buildings that have not turned into ruins still remain. They dot the landscape, with steeples looming above neighboring buildings. They stand somnolent, stately, and even quiet with that continued air of permanence. The religious buildings is a still and thriving place, the place to be. It is still popular for big occasions and still the place of rest. It is a good working house, bursting at the seams with vocational duties, volunteers, and those appointed. A working house is a house of correction, the precursor of the workhouse, where the persistent idler is punished. A working house is a good house that has everything in order. 13th century priories. Behind every backdrop of a village lies a church. A hamlet can only be called a village until it has a community. Churches or religious buildings brings a community together, and they have served that purpose for a long time. A small number of English and Welsh religious houses can trace their origins back to pre-conquest and Anglo-Saxon Celtic foundations. This was unfortunately during a time when churches were suppressed. The overwhelming majority of the 625 monastic communities dissolved by Henry VIII owed their existence to the wave of monastic enthusiasm that had swept Western Christendom in the 11th and 12th centuries. Very few English houses had been founded later than the end of the 13th century. In 1153, for example, the Archbishop of Canterbury, Wood, gave certain houses to Benedictine nuns and charged them an annual rent rate of 2 marks. Many a times there were demands for lamb, wool, and various sheaves. In the early 1500s, it was inevitable that these smaller houses or priories would eventually succumb to poverty. The larger buildings that have not turned into ruins still remain. They dot the landscape, with steeples looming above neighboring buildings. They stand somnolent, stately, and even quiet with that continued air of permanence. The religious buildings is a still and thriving place, the place to be. It is still popular for big occasions and still the place of rest. It is a good working house, bursting at the seams with vocational duties, volunteers, and those appointed. A working house is a house of correction, the precursor of the workhouse, where the persistent idler is punished. A working house is a good house that has everything in order.
You're listening to The Jennifer Valentine-Miller Show, containing a selection of my chosen media items. If you would like to interact, please visit me at www.healingrelationstv.co.uk, where you'll find my social media platforms, or send me an email at contact@healingrelationstv.co.uk. Are you looking for a radio show that is relevant, with a new topic each week, with music and media, and the occasional cake recipe? Then tune in to the Jennifer Valentine-Miller Show, the radio production with a message from 9 a.m. to 9:30 a.m. every first and third Saturday of the month on PRZ-FM 109.2. Hi, you're listening to the Jennifer Valentine-Miller Show, tackling the issue of knife crime through the community and understanding why children are important. And if you wanted me to contact you with regards to the conference in July, the SAY conference, you can send me an email at contact@healingrelationstv.co.uk. So hundreds of British teenagers are being sent by their parents to East Africa to avoid knife crime in the UK. Why are they taking that drastic choice? In the few years, one young man was doing his A-levels and he found it very tough indeed. And he was seeing people being dropped from school every other day by being stabbed. His family came to the realization that London's not the place to be for a teenager. The young boy's name, for example, was Yusuf, and he was born and raised in London, but moved to Nairobi after a close friend in his neighbourhood was stabbed to death. It is a decision an increasing number of parents are taking for their children's safety. Of the 100 people stabbed to death in the UK so far this year, 8% were of Somali heritage, according to the RISE project, which works with young British Somalians in North London. Jamal Hassan mentors young men in London, many from Somali families. He explains parents want to protect their child by all means necessary. If it means that the child doesn't finish school, college or university, or he will not have a good job by the time you come from them in the future, is not really important. What is important is that child's life. One mother who had sent her child to Africa told him she could now sleep at night because she knew any police siren she heard was not for her son. As Christians, we turn to the Bible as our guide for living. It has so much to say to us about spiritual things, but also about what's practical. So what does the Bible say about children? The charity World Vision says that children are a part of God's creative plan. God blessed them and said to them, "Be fruitful and increase in number, fill the earth and subdue it," in Genesis 1:28. After creating Adam and Eve, God commanded that they be fruitful or have children. The original design included families with children. Children were not an afterthought. Everything about creation was pronounced good, including his design for children. Secondly, children are gifts from God to families. Children are a heritage from the Lord, offspring, a reward from him, in Psalms 127:3. The word heritage comes from the root meaning to get or inherit. It is an honour and responsibility to be entrusted with a little one from God. We stand beside him to shepherd their growth and development, to advocate for them and provide for their needs while they are in our care Thirdly, children need nurture and guidance. Train up a child in the way he should go. Even when he is old, he will not depart from it. Proverbs 22:6. When planting vines and some bushes, gardeners will attach them to a framework, like a pole or trellis, to keep them from spreading out of control. Children need solid structure to keep their physical, emotional, social, and spiritual growth on track too. This means we are present in their lives, supporting their growth and development, and leading by godly example. Fourthly, children need discipline. Discipline your children, and they'll give you peace. They'll bring you delight to your desire. Proverbs 29:17. There's no question, disciplining children is hard work. It takes the fruit of the Spirit, love, joy, peace, forbearance, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control, spoken of in Galatians 5:22-23. Parents who really love their children will discipline them, as God does to us. Not harshly, but with the goal of leading them in the ways of the Lord. Done this way, they'll become adults and fulfill all the Creator intends for them to become. And that's in Hebrews 12:7. Fifthly, orphans, displaced and refugee children and children living in poverty need special care. Do not oppress the widow or the fatherless, the foreigner or the poor. In Zechariah 7:10. Children are vulnerable even in good circumstances. But when there's poverty or violence, children can suffer real damage. The Bible singles out orphans for us to help. Those without fathers are close behind orphans. And children living as refugees, strangers, or displaced by conflict, or living in extreme poverty, are also vulnerable. There is no social or financial safety net for them, no one to provide for their nurture or need. God asks people to worship Him, to help take care of children in such vulnerable places. The 6th point says, children need protection. Meanwhile, our women and children will live in fortified cities for protection from the inhabitants in the land. And that's Numbers 32:17. We live in a world corrupted by evil. Child labour, physical abuse, child exploitation, and child marriage are only some of the challenges children today may encounter, not to mention things like drug and alcohol addiction, bullying, or gang involvement. God is our deliverer from trouble and enemies, and we should protect children from people who seek their harm as an extension of our love for Him. Some of us are even called further by God to act as advocates or to become professionals in child protection programs and organisations. But whether a professional or not, we can all be aware and help to protect the children in our lives and community. And the 7th point is, children are blessed by God. And He took the children in His arms, placed His arms on them and blessed them. And that's in Mark 10:16. In blessing the children while they're on earth as God incarnate, Jesus shows his heart towards little ones. In verse 13 of the passage of Mark, the disciples rebuked the people for bringing their children to Jesus, probably because he was talking with self-important religious leaders. His response was anger at his followers' ignorance and pettiness. Their actions were unkind and unworthy of disciples. Children are not too unimportant to have God's undivided attention. He always desires to bless them in every way. Now follows an interview with Justin Briley and Michael Franzese, a New York mobster turned Christian evangelist.